Now I don't see you guys. Okay. Anyway, my disclaimer here is this, and you can all hear me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
And you can see the slides.
yes.
Okay, good. Um, my disclaimer is that when I went to go find obscure and often overlooked women in history, there was so many of them that it was really hard for me to even make choices. So, and plus I wanted to keep it a little bit shorter than the last one we did because that kind of ran over a bit. So, um, please, if we get done this or we get to any point and you want to add some conversation or add somebody that you think is similar or something like that, please do. Because I would like to have your input as well. So I'm kind of doing it the same as last time, except I didn't make it quote unquote a quiz, but we can guess as we go along. And this is my very first person right there at the desk. And I don't know if anybody recognizes her or not, probably not, because these people are obscure. Her name is Jane Bolin. She only died in 2007.
Hmm.
And what do you think her profession was? A banker, a doctor, a lawyer, or a teacher?
A doctor.
Okay.
I'll say
Anybody else?
Says
Doctor.
Okay. Paige said what?
a lawyer.
A lawyer.
Okay. Well, Paige is right. She was a lawyer.
Oh,
And so what makes it so special that she was a lawyer? I mean, there's a lot of female lawyers out there, including my sister. However, this one she was interracial. She was a subject to discrimination in her own hometown in New York, and she would occasionally be denied services at businesses. She was influenced as a child by articles and pictures of the hangings of the Black Southerners and stuff like that. And so after going to high school, she tried to get into Vassar College, but didn't take Black students. So she was 16 years old when she enrolled at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, which, a side note, my husband Phil worked there when he was 20 years old in the kitchen. But but it was only her and one other Black student there, so they lived off campus together. And then the career advisor told her she shouldn't go to law school, try to go to Yale Law School because of her race and her gender. But she did go. She was the only Black student, and she was the only one of 3 women that were there. And she was the first Black woman to receive a law degree from Yale in 1931, and she passed the New York
Wow.
bar in 1932. And not only that, what really kind of got me was at the bottom where it says she was the first Black woman to join the New York City Bar Association and the first to join the New York City Law Department. And then she became a judge in
Wow.
1939.
That's
So
all.
she hit a lot of firsts, and she retired in 79. And like I said, one of the reasons why I picked her was because I look at all the stuff she overcame. I mean, she didn't just overcome being Black in a time when it was, still discrimination and stuff, but she was interracial, and that was like really bad back then. Even in the North, people were kind of weird about it. So anybody have thoughts about that? I know that was just kind of a little warm up. Okay. The next person I have is this young lady. She looks almost like a kid, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you know who she is? She's got a great smile. Her name is Bessie Coleman.
I'm
And she-
going because of what's on her hat. I'm going with
Maybe a-
aviator.
Aviator?
Maybe D.
Yeah, aviation pioneer. That's what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay. So you are correct. Aviation pioneer.
Because she's got the wings on her hat.
I know. Well, the other pictures I found with her was with her plane and everything. And I was like, yeah, no, that's going to be a dead giveaway. We'll try to do a little something else. But then when I blew up her picture, I realized, yeah, you really can see the wings. But, but so, but really, what was so special about Bessie? Right. But the thing was, she was the first African American and the first Native American woman pilot she performed the tricks, you know, like the eights and the what do they call those? You know, when they flip over.
Loops.
Yeah, the loop-de-loop thing. Yeah. But she was from Texas, and then she went to live with her brothers in Chicago. One comes back from the war. They come back from the war, and they start teasing her about how French women could fly and she couldn't. Well, you know what that made her do, right? What it would do to any of us, right? Oh yeah, watch this, right? Except nobody in America would teach her how to fly, so she ended up going to France to go to pilot school, or to go to flying school.
Wow.
Yeah, so she ended up over there, and then at the same time, you know, she really was working for, you know, for equal rights, not just for women, but for African Americans too. And so I like this part where it says she refused to speak anywhere that was segregated or discriminated against African Americans. And so, but she met her demise. She was very young when she died. She took a test flight with the pilot. She had already survived one plane accident, but she was flying with the test flight with a mechanic, and the mechanic was flying the plane, and a loose wrench got stuck in the engine of the aircraft, and he couldn't control it, and the plane flipped over, and she didn't wear a seatbelt because planes didn't have seatbelts then, so she fell out and she died.
Oh my gosh.
But I have this little video about her that kind of tells. All my videos are really short this time.
Bessie Coleman was the first woman of African American descent to become a pilot. She was an example of determination and strength to women and girls of any race. Bessie was born in Texas on January 26, 1892. She was a good student. She excelled in math and loved to read. At age 23, she moved to Chicago, where she lived with her brothers and worked as a manicurist. She heard stories of pilots returning from World War I, and the desire to fly was sparked. Bessie looked into going to flying school, but no school would accept her because she was black. She searched out black flying instructors, but they wouldn't train her because she was a woman. The publisher of the Chicago Defender newspaper heard of Bessie's plight, and he encouraged her to study flight abroad. Bessie took French lessons and was funded by the newspaper to move to France to learn to fly. On June 15, 1921, Bessie Coleman was the first person of African American descent to earn an international pilot's license. Bessie then took additional courses to improve her flying skills and then flew home to the United States. She was met with much media fanfare when she reached New York. Bessie wanted to become a stunt flyer, but that required advanced lessons. No one in the United States would train her, so she went back to Europe and was trained by Anthony Fokker in the Netherlands. Bessie returned to the United States and became a star stunt pilot. She became known as Queen Bess and had admirers of both the black and white communities. Bessie enjoyed the attention, but she dreamed of opening a flight school. Sadly, Bessie died in a terrible plane accident on April 30th, 1926. She was thrown from a plane and fell 2,000 feet to her death. She was only 34 years old. Bessie Coleman left her mark on the flying community for both women and people of African American descent. She paved the way for others to achieve their dream of flight, no matter their race or gender.
Oh, I hate when it does this. Now, who's the other one that we always hear about when it comes to flying? Who's the other woman that we always hear about?
Amelia Earhart.
Yeah, Amelia Earhart. And you know this one, what happened to Amelia Earhart? Do you remember?
Disappeared.
Yeah. She never really, yeah. And Bessie made it. Bessie did a whole lot. And not only did she overcome being, you know, it's like they wouldn't take her because she was black, and then she found some black people that wouldn't. They wouldn't take her because she was a woman. I mean, really, that's a lot to overcome. I think she did fantastic. Now, here's an interesting one. I don't have a video for this lady. Who does she look like to you, guys?
She looks like that lady on that show about the girls.
I know, doesn't she? She looks
Yes.
exactly like that, like the house mother on Facts of Life or something, right?
Yes.
Charlotte Ray.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like her, doesn't it? But it's not her. Do you know who it is?
Maybe she's an ordained minister.
Oh no. Look at what her name is. Does it look familiar?
Maybe ordained minister. Hey,
Look at look at her middle name, which isn't really a middle name. It was her first husband's name. Does it ring bells with anybody?
He started basketball
No.
or the YMCA.
No.
maybe fax machine.
This lady, Betty Nesmith Graham, invented liquid paper. And what's really interesting about her, if you look at her middle name or her first husband's name, it's Nesmith. Think about where did that?
Oh, wow.
Do you remember the monkeys? Do you remember the monkeys?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the monkey.
Yeah, well, Michael Nesmith was in the monkeys. Remember?
Yeah.
He was one of them. Well, this is his mother.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's his mother. But this is really cool. Her story is awesome. She got divorced from Michael's mother and father. He left her, and so she had to go out to work, and she was a self-proclaimed terrible typist, and it was hard to erase. If anybody who typed back then, right, knew how terrible it was with the IBM Selectric, the newer ones, before they had the ball on them. So she had a terrible time, but also to make extra money, she used her talent painting holiday windows at the bank. And she realized with lettering, artists never correct by erasing, but they always paint over their errors. So she decided to do what artists do. And she put some tempera water-based paint in a bottle and took her watercolor brush to the office and used it to fix her mistakes. Now, is that not ingenious or what?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so and this is the even better part I like. She secretly used her white correction paint for 5 years, making some improvements with the help of her son's chemistry teacher. Some bosses admonished her for using it, but her co-workers frequently sought her paint out. Can you imagine, right? You're trying to hide this stuff from your boss, and all your co-workers are coming up and using it. So she eventually began marketing it as Mistake Out in 1956, and then the name changed to Liquid Paper when she began her own company. And it started out operating at a small loss, and she made it in her home, and then her kid even helped her. But then they relocated it from her kitchen to a 10-foot by 26-foot portable metal structure in her backyard, where they packed it and shipped it and all that. And check out this last line. I love this. She sold liquid paper to the Gillette Corporation for $47.5 million in 1979.
1979. Wow.
Is that not amazing? And at that time, her company employed 200 people and made 25 million bottles of liquid paper a year.
Wow.
I think with women's things like this, I think it's all about ingenuity, isn't it?
Yeah.
All about ingenuity. And I remember, does anybody remember having liquid paper around maybe when you were younger?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I would still use it and everything now, but I remember my mom worked in an office, and I was, gosh, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years old, and was hanging out in there one day, and I thought, and it says liquid paper on it, so it made me wonder, is it really liquid paper? Like, if you poured it on something, would it turn into paper? Right. So I took a piece of paper and I ripped it, and then I poured her liquid paper on it. All I did was make a mess. It doesn't make paper, just in case you were wondering.
No, but I mean, it really was helpful, because when you type stuff, I mean, it was just torturous because you had to backspace and all that stuff. It was crazy.
Oh yeah, I know it. It drove me nuts. I used to live with liquid paper, and we still. And when I worked for the county, I asked somebody if anybody got a bottle of whiteout, and I was like admonished. They're like, you can't use whiteout when you work for the government. You can't use whiteout in here. I'm like, oh well.
My only issue with the liquid paper is it's not good for left-handed people.
Oh yeah, because you drag your arm through it.
Because you have to Yeah, so you definitely are blowing on that paper for a good little while until it can go, or you have like a smear of white all over your hand.
Did you not get the left-handed bottle?
Yeah. I tried that, Faye. I tried looking for it everywhere and just couldn't find it.
Well, maybe you could invent the left-handed liquid paper. All right. This is a well-known actress. What else was she? First of all, does she look familiar to you? She was a well-known actress in her day.
I know. I think I know. It's the inventor.
She's an inventor.
Been in the news recently. Not really news, but
Hedy Lamarr.
Hedy
Yeah.
Lamarr.
Hedy Lamarr, and you're right. She was an inventor.
She was an inventor, yeah.
This really surprised me. I did not know this. I always heard of her and saw her like, in old movies and stuff like that. I did not know she was an inventor.
Yeah, she was pretty bright. She was very smart.
Yeah. Well, maybe she's not as obscure as I thought she was then when it comes to being in history. So what she actually ended up inventing was, and I don't even understand this, but it's a radio guidance system using frequency hopping spread spectrum technology for Allied torpedoes intended to defeat the threat of jamming by the Axis powers. And what's really cool about it is she was ahead of her time, because look what it does. They use it for Bluetooth technology
Oh, wow.
and Wi-Fi. Now, who
Wow.
would have thought, right? And then the value of her work was put in the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2014. And I do have a little short video on her. I think my video is like every other.
Hedy Lamarr is best known as one of the most glamorous actresses in the early days of Hollywood. But she was also one of the greatest technological minds of the 20th century. She spent her free time inventing items to help the military and learning everything she could from other great minds of the era. Hedy was born Hedwig Eva Marie Kiesler in Vienna in 1914. She moved to Hollywood and changed her name in 1938. Before fleeing Europe, Lamarr left her first husband after attending a dinner party. She went to the event wearing all of her jewelry and slipped out, never to return home. Other versions of the story have her disguising herself as her own maid. Either way, it's pretty cool. That first marriage was to Friedrich Mandl, an arms dealer for Mussolini. Lamarr would sit in on his meetings, making the other attendees think she had no idea about the complicated methodologies they discussed. After learning from her husband's meetings about weapon technology, Lamarr started devising and engineering her own inventions. Her early tinkerings ranged from a fizzing cube that instantly turned water into cola to new airplane wings for Howard Hughes. Her biggest scientific achievement came during World War II. When she asked to help the troops, she was told to look pretty on a USO tour. Instead, Lamarr came up with the idea for a secret communication system, essentially frequency hopping, designed to keep enemies from jamming radio-controlled torpedoes. Though it wasn't adopted by the military immediately, it is now the basis for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth.
Oh.
And she patented this idea in 1942. By the late 1950s, Lamarr retired from film and joined the National Inventors Council. She was once again told she'd be most useful by using her pretty face and celebrity status to raise money. So she sold kisses for $50,000 each and raised $7 million at a single event.
Wow.
Later in her life, Lamarr retired to Florida and kept inventing. She created a pocket on the inside of a tissue box where you could put your used tissues, and an improved version of a traffic light. For her thirst for knowledge and constant striving to help the world with her inventions, we honor Hedy Lamarr, a great life hacker of history.
That's really awesome.
Isn't that
Wow.
cool? Like,
Yeah.
and so
Really.
granted, she's not. Oh, stop! I already went to the next one. Granted, she's not unknown, but for this accomplishment, I had no idea.
Wow.
No idea that we can thank her for our Bluetooth and our Wi-Fi.
That's really cool. That's cool.
Uh-huh. Anybody else got anything else they want to say before we keep moving? All right. So Any idea about this lady? I could have used her at either one. I decided to save her for this one because of I kind of had too many for the last one. Does she look familiar to anybody? And she's not one of Faye's relative just because she's one of the has the criminal thing on. Her name
Oh,
is
Mary.
Mary Kay Beard, not to be confused with Mary Kay Ash.
He does.
Maybe she was A or B.
You think A or B?
I think Angel Tree found her and then stole all the money.
No, she stole all the money first.
Yeah.
I could not find a video on her, but she's kind of been one of my heroes for a while. A, because of prison ministry, and that's kind of one of my passions. But B, I read the really cool book about her too, and I just love her story.
I need some help.
So, can you hold on one second? I just need him to take his computer off. There we go. So all I had was narrative on her, although I do have an or a biography about her if anybody's interested. I certainly have them if you want to read it. But she was a safecracker, and she robbed banks with her husband, and she was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, like some of our people last week. And they actually called her the Bonnie Parker of Alabama, and they said she was going to die that way, but she didn't. She got 21-year sentence, and then she got paroled on early after like 5.5 years. But when she was in solitary confinement, she got a Bible. She started asking questions, and she said, "Okay, God, if you do something to do this, get me out of here, or do this, I'll give the rest of my life back to you." And so for 6 Christmases, she would watch the women get the toiletries from the churches and put them in little piles and wrap them in whatever they had around and give them to their kids for Christmas. And then when she got paroled, she went to work for Prison Fellowship, which was founded by Chuck Colson, another guy who committed white collar crime and ended up in prison. And the first thing that they asked her to do was do a Christmas project for the inmates. And at the time, everybody was doing the same thing, sending the toiletries to the jail and the prison. And she wanted to do something different. So she had the moms sign their kids up, put the little angel papers things on the tree in the mall. And there was 100 on there. And every single one got provided for that year. And so that was the beginning of Angel Tree. And then well, of course, this is an old number, but as of 2012, 364,000 inmates, children received gifts through Angel Tree. And you see that everywhere now.
Yeah, wow.
But it's, I just thought, for me, I thought that was kind of somebody that you don't hear about, and that did a really cool thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's also a good example of somebody that turned their life around, you know.
Yeah.
We looked at all those people last week that that were all like the criminals and stuff like that, the notorious ones. But this was a true picture of somebody who had just turned it around, took what was bad and turned it to good.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. So I got another one. I like this one. Does she look familiar to anybody? Paige is going to try to figure out what she did by her hat, right, Paige?
I think she was a commander, so she was either A or D.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought? Alice Euler Ramsey, 1886 and 1983. She drove cross country. But what's so amazing about driving cross country?
She did it in a plane.
Huh?
Always.
She did it in a plane. I don't know.
No, she did it. Look at this thing. In 1908, her husband bought her a new Maxwell runabout. That summer, she went 6,000 miles near her Hackensack, New Jersey home. And then in August 1909, at the age of 22, she drove coast to coast from New York to California. And at that time, only 16 men had competed in the coast-to-coast drive, and Ramsey was the first woman to ever attempt the feat. Not only did she complete the 3,800-mile journey in 59 days, this part kills me, but it was a particularly notable feat considering only 152 of those miles were paved.
Oh,
Can you
God.
imagine?
Wow.
All the rest was on dirt roads.
It was
Wow.
one bumpy ride.
Yeah, in 1960, AAA named her the Women Motorist of the Century, and in 2000, she became the first woman ever inducted into the Automobile Hall of Fame. Is that not cool?
That is very cool.
That is very cool.
And
Because you think there wasn't restaurants like there are now. There wasn't gas stations like there are now. So I don't
Well,
even, yeah.
it's just
Wow.
no GPS,
Nope.
right? Who even knows what the map? I'm sure there must have been some sort of mapping system back then, but really, 1909,
Wow.
the
That's
car
great.
was not,
That's awesome.
isn't it? I think there's a video. Yes, there is a video.
Where's the-
It's from the Transportation Museum of Maine.
In 1909, Alice Ramsey became the first woman to drive an automobile across the United States. She was more than just a woman who dared. She was actually a woman who dared and had the backing of an entire automobile manufacturing company. As a 22-year-old, Alice didn't conduct this trip alone. She actually took 3 other women with her, 2 of whom were her sisters-in-law. She took a 19-year-old friend who was described as unattached. Of course, the older women were serving as chaperones on the trip. None of them knew how to drive except for Alice. And as they prepared to leave in the pouring rain, they were sitting through what seemed like interminable photographic opportunities. Just as they were ready to take off on their trip, a man emerged from the crowd, chivalrously trying to start the car, reached down for the crank, and when Alice saw him, she stopped him. She got out of the car, cranked the car to get it started, and off they went. She performed as much of the maintenance and repairs as she could. There were some jobs that were too big for her to handle, just as a job today couldn't be accomplished by a single mechanic. She did virtually everything she could do just to ensure that this really was a trip that was conducted by women. Navigation in an automobile in 1909 was wholly different from what we experience today. We had automobile blue books for the territory east of the Mississippi River. Everything west of that, the best they could hope for were railroad tracks or telegraph lines, and if they did find telegraph lines, they typically chose the pole that had the most lines on it because they could surmise that that went to a big city. They were really flying by the seat of their pants. This was dead reckoning at its best. It was approximately a 3,800-mile trip, but only about 152 miles of that were actually paved. Driving an automobile across the country was a remarkable feat. It was just as much a testimonial to the reliability and the quality of the vehicle as it was to the stalwart nature of the driver. Maxwell had made their dealerships across the country available, their resources, their facilities. They sent cars out as escorts in unfamiliar territory, but Alice really wanted to do this alone. In fact, at one point in Iowa, the mud and the rain, the conditions were so miserable, it was suggested that they just put the car on a flatbed of a train and deliver it out of that territory to get them onto some smooth sailing, and Alice utterly refused to do that. She said, "I'll drive every inch of it if it kills me." In one occasion, Alice encountered a landmark known as Danger Hill, and she encountered another driver. He was stuck in the mud, couldn't get up the hill. So Alice waited for him for a little while, and when she got impatient, she eased her way around him, backed up, and tied a rope from the Maxwell to the Mitchell. And sure enough, the Maxwell and Alice were able to pull a second car up Danger Hill. When Ramsey and her team arrived in San Francisco on August 7th, they had traveled some 3,800 miles over 59 days. Despite the fact that she returned to New York in a train, she would go on to cross the United States in an automobile over 30 times over the course of her life. At the end of the trip, the Maxwell was self-proclaimed the car for a lady to drive. And so highly regarded was her prowess behind the wheel. In 1960, she was named by the Automobile Association of America as the Woman Driver of the Century and the First Lady of Automotive Travel by the Automobile Manufacturers Association. Despite all of Ramsey's accomplishments and accolades behind the wheel, it wasn't until the year 2000 that she became the first woman to be inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame. Alice Ramsey saw this more than just a publicity stunt that Maxwell Briscoe Motor Company did. She really took this as a serious personal endeavor. She was really being true to her vision of what this trip was.
Is that not cool?
That's very cool. Yeah.
I just thought, go girl, right? And it was like a road trip for the girls, right? I'm sure it wasn't glamorous like we would think of for a road trip, but I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
One thing that stuck out to me when you see the video, you realize they didn't have roofs on these cars. So she's doing this long journey. There's really no windshield. There's nothing keeping her from any debris on the road or any rain or anything. So yeah, she was a tough cookie.
Yeah, well, like that picture of them
Yeah.
all in their raincoats, right?
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying this, Vicki. Thank you so much for all your time and effort and everything. This has been wonderful.
You're welcome. I had a great time putting it together and trying to, like I said, it's really hard to pick people, but some of these things I saw and I was just like, oh no, I have to do this one. And I do need to give credit. I got her and some other ones that you'll see near the end from my AAA magazine from this month had a tribute to women. So I grabbed some from there and went around. It was harder to find some video for some of these people because they are, kind of obscure. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
um,
Wow. Cool.
but let me I got a few more here. So this, isn't she pretty? I just
Yes,
love,
she really is.
yeah. Uh-huh. She is, and her name is Laura Cornelius Kellogg. And again, and a lot of the ones that I have too, because I have them from older times, because it seems now, I mean, like all of the big firsts or the big, things that were obscure or farther back in time. So I don't really have anybody in the modern day on here, but what group of people did she advocate for? Any thoughts?
Native Americans.
What makes you say that?
Color says.
Huh?
Stacey said it first. I'm trying to get her to say.
Oh,
Yeah,
I think she has Native American features. That just what drew me to Native Americans.
yep, you're right. You were right, and you're right, because I mean, just because she married Kellogg doesn't mean that she wasn't Native American, right?
Right.
But so she was born on the Indian reservation in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and she was an activist, an author, and a policy reformer, and she was one of the founding members of the Society of American Indians in 1911, which doesn't sound like much, but because I think a lot of times we don't realize, because women in Congress and women judges and women everything is just so common today, we don't realize that in 1911 this was a big deal to be a founding member of that. And that was the first national American Indian rights organized by and for the American Indians, which they don't even call them that anymore, Native Americans. But anyway, so she was an advocate for this particular group, the Iroquois, I can't say that. And she fought for communal tribal lands and autonomy and self-government, because everybody thought that the best thing for an Indian was to become an American and live like the rest of society was doing. So during the 20s and the 30s, her and her husband tried to get some other land claims in New York on behalf of those people. And there it is right there. People thought they should just assimilate into American society. We stick them on reservations, but then we tell them they should assimilate. Go figure, right?
Yeah.
That was the only way that they were going to get saved, is if they assimilated. But many progressive area Indians and the members of the SAI fought to preserve their native rights, and because they wanted to send them to board the kids to school. They wanted to get rid of their languages, their cultures, the political and economic and social system. And one of the things that I always think of about that is, look at how much we would have lost if they really just pushed all those people back into society. I learned so much, like going out to Cherokee and stuff like that,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
because it must have been terrible, because as a mother, they actually took those children from the moms and didn't give them a choice. And a lot of times they sent them to these boarding schools that the government put to teach them the English language.
Mhm.
And some of those teachers were terrible to the children, like locking them in hot boxes and stuff. I mean, it was hard. Must have been horrible for those kids.
What is a hot box?
A hot box is an enclosed small area that is locked, and you stick the kid in there and you stick it out in the sun, and God only knows how hot it gets. And, you know, the kid's in there in the dark, but the sun's beating down on this little bitty box. Yeah. It was
So
done a
it's
lot to
it's a
Cherokee
behavior.
kids.
It's supposed to be like a behavior thing, right? Like
Yeah.
punishment thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It would have taught me to scalp white people. I mean,
Yeah.
it was terrible, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of writings that a lot of Indian children did, especially during the Trail of Tears. Some of them
Yeah.
kept diaries, and the Cherokees developed an actual alphabet. So they actually have a lot of the stories in writing, and it makes your skin run cold if you read some of these stories of what they endured on their Trail of Tears.
Yeah, I saw that, like the outdoor play that they do in Cherokee, and it was very
Yeah.
touching, that Trail of Tears thing. But this lady, they called her a cyclone and a woman of brilliance. Hers is a fascinating story of a native woman in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And that's all I have on her, but I just really thought
That's really cool.
she was somebody that definitely was like an unsung hero. Now, these two are sisters. You may, and
Wow.
gosh, they're kind of homely looking.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. I mean, they did end up not even getting married or anything. But they're Sarah and Angelina Grimke. Anybody ever hear of them?
No, I haven't heard of them.
Okay,
They
so
look scary. Maybe they were
Abolitionists.
yeah, I'm telling you, abolitionists.
they were.
Oh, they were.
They were, and yeah, they were sisters. They were actually born in and raised in Charleston on a plantation that they grew up with slaves, and then they took off up north and started to fight for the slaves. And if there's a fiction, I don't think I put it in here, but there's a fiction book by Sue Monk Kidd called, help me, The Invention of Wings. And it's really good, and it actually goes back and forth. It's more like Sarah's story, back and forth with the slave. It's a great read. But they grew, like they in their 20s, they went up to Philadelphia, went to join the Quakers, got really involved in the abolitionists. They even tried to go back and try to do some stuff in Charleston. They couldn't even go like back to the funerals and stuff in their family, because they if they got bagged, they were going to be in trouble. So they acted publicly in social reform movements, and they were ridiculed for their activity because they were white naturally. And why should we be helping the Black people? And they then I think it's Angelina ends up being also getting really involved in the or they were both activists for the women's rights movement. It kind of ran together, but Angelina did more than Sarah. And I have two very, very short videos that go with them. One's on the sisters, and one's Angelina.
As a moral being, I feel I owe it to the suffering slave and to the deluded master, to my country and all the world, to do all I can to overturn a system of complicated crimes.
Sarah and Angelina Grimke were sisters, raised in a slaveholding family in South Carolina. But their own personal religious awakenings would carry them far from home, converting them into outspoken abolitionists and finally, women's rights activists.
It was religion that carried them out of Charleston, not a hatred of slavery. They were part of the Second Great Awakening process, seeking perfection.
The Grimke sisters first became Quakers. Later, after hearing the impassioned anti-slavery speeches of William Lloyd Garrison, they became abolitionists. When their fervent anti-slavery speeches drew men as well as women to hear them, they provoked a public outcry.
The congregational ministers meet and say, how can we stop this? They issue a pastoral letter that condemns the sisters and says that they are leading the culture to ruin. And it's at that point that Angelina and Sarah Grimke compose the defense of their speaking in terms of women's rights.
Men and women were created equal. They are both moral and accountable beings. And whatever is right for man to do is right for women to do.
In the rigidly structured society of the 1830s, Sarah and Angelina Grimke were on the fringes of respectability. But in their passion for religion and reform, the Grimke sisters epitomized the spirit of the times.
Where's my next? Yeah, that's the other one. Whoops. Helps if you hit start.
Political activist, abolitionist, suffragist, fought the injustices of slavery, racism, and sexism during the mid-19th century. Born into a wealthy slave-owning plantation family in Charleston, South Carolina, she stood behind her sister, Sarah Moore Grimke, the only known white Southern woman to be a part of the abolition movement and the first women to speak publicly against slavery. Traveled across the country to spread the importance of abolishing slavery. The first woman in American history to appear before a state legislative body to discuss women's rights and fighting slavery. Active in the women's movement, she helped set the agenda, later followed by famous suffragists Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, calling for equal educational opportunities and women's right to vote. Prophet. Her writings are considered to be one of the earliest expressions of feminism recorded in the modern world. Inducted into the National Abolition Hall of Fame, Angelina Grimke, genius.
Hey there.
What do you think of those two, huh? In the time when women did not speak up, not only did they speak up, but they spoke out for a very controversial topic.
Yeah, they sure did.
Mm-hmm.
Went against their upbringing and their family.
Totally, yeah.
Very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. Let me get to the
I'm
next.
sure they put their family probably at risk too. I mean, they risked a lot, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, they didn't have, I mean, they only had each other. They neither one was married. They had, and they couldn't go back to their home at all.
Yeah.
Couldn't go back to South Carolina. This last part I have is just a quick few people here. Oh, I think. Yeah. These are some women's contributions to the automobile industry. I find this very interesting, only because what their contributions are, and like I subtitled it there, ingenious, practical, and necessary, and things that we use today that we don't even think about where they came from to begin with, right? So they're all like, all their stuff is on one page. It's not really the quizzy things or anything like that. But I like this one, Bertha Benz, and she came up with the idea for brake pads. And she was the wife of Carl Benz, the ones from Mercedes-Benz, and she was his business partner. And she's credited with devising the world's first brake pads. And isn't that cool? At a time when the brakes were made out of wood. And when they began to wear down and fail, she went to a local shoemaker and asked him to put in leather soles. Now, who would have thunk?
Right. That's cool.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, we always think that's one of those things that, oh yeah, I got to go get my brake pads changed. We never really think about what it was like before. When they first made cars, there was a lot of things that weren't even a part of it. And she found a way to make them last longer. So
that's cool.
I thought that was pretty cool. And
yeah.
bring this over there. And then the next one is the windshield wipers.
Oh,
This is a
wow.
pretty interesting story. This is Mary Anderson, and she was riding on a streetcar around the turn of the century, and she noticed that the driver could hardly see through the front windshield. And I don't have pictures of what the windshield used to look like, but the window would split into several pieces so the driver could move the snow or rain covered section out of his sight and then pull a dry piece across, And so, but there was naturally a poorly designed system. We know who designed it. Exposed and exposed everyone in the vehicle to the inclement weather when you went and switched the windshield. So she started sketching an improved wiper device, and became the first person to ever patent a vehicle window cleaning device. And though her device is the predecessor of today's windshield wipers, because it wasn't the same thing, she never profited from her invention.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? And this is not the same as the other kind, because this one was a lever. Whoops, go back. Hers was a lever on the inside of the vehicle that controlled the rubber blade on the outside. And so you just used the lever in the spring-loaded arm and move it back and forth. You didn't, it wasn't like an electronic thing. And there was a counterweight in there too to make it work right. And then it says in 1903, when Anderson applied for the patent, cars were not very popular, and Henry Ford's Model A automobile hadn't even been manufactured yet. Therefore, when Anderson tried to sell the rights to her invention, they rejected her application. They argued that it wasn't needed. Right? We don't consider it such a commercial value as to warrant its undertaking its sale, right?
Wow.
And they said that drivers would be distracted by the operating of the device and the moving of the wipers.
But not by snow, sleet, and hail, right?
Right. No, when I was a kid and I used to watch the windshield wipers, I kind of thought that too. I always wondered, how does that not bother the person that's driving when they're just going back and forth? But when you're focused on your driving, you're not focused on the back and forth.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Anyways, I thought that was a cool one too. The next one is the turn signals. Isn't she pretty?
She is.
Yeah.
Florence Lawrence, she was an actress in silent pictures, and she had quite an interest in cars. In 1914, after learning about and tinkering with automobiles, she came up with the mechanism of signaling arm for drivers wishing to turn. And through a simple push of a button, her simple invention raised and lowered a flag on the rear bumper of the automobile to inform the other drivers where the car was headed. And she also did the simple and ingenious device to let them know that they were going to stop. Upon depressing of the brake, the small sign reading stop would pop up in the rear of the car. Though rudimentary in design, her inventions ultimately proved invaluable on the road. But she didn't have it patented. That one or the first electric windshield wiper, which began selling under Bridgewood manufacturers. So she didn't get claim for either one of them. She claimed to fail. While she failed to claim the first patent, her ingenuity and passion for the automobile was an anomaly at the time. And she performed, again, how many women are we running into here that perform their own mechanical work? And they devised the safety measures that put her on the forefront of what could be viewed as an early form of women's liberation, one that she's largely been forgotten for. And it wouldn't be until 1925 that anything resembling her design would see a patent, one turned in by larger automobile ones. And then she actually took her own life. Wow. After she got burned. She got burned in a studio fire. She was trying to save somebody in there, and she, because of the burn, she just had a hard time finding acting jobs, so she killed herself, which is sad.
Oh gosh.
And I think there's one more. Yep, the painted lines. And all of these, they're like so necessary, and they're so safety oriented, right? And they're all things that women came up with. Now there's June McCarroll. She was from New York. And I found it interesting that she was a nurse, and then afterwards she actually became a doctor. I love how she did this too. She was driving on the road that led to her office in California on a stretch of highway. that she was run off the road by a truck, and so she decided to show him what side of the road was his. And so, right? And so she found herself face to face with the truck on the highway. It didn't take me long to choose between the Sandy berth and the 10-ton truck. So she had that's when she got her idea of a white line painted down the center of the highways of the country as a safety measure. And she told her idea to the Chamber of Commerce with no success. And finally, she took it upon herself to hand paint a white stripe down the middle of that road, thus establishing the actual width of the lane to prevent similar accidents. Through the Women's Club and other organizations, she launched a vigorous statewide letter writing campaign on behalf of her proposal. And in November 1924, the idea was adopted by the California Highway Commission, and 3,500 miles of lines were painted. And I love this, at a cost of $163,000, but that's equivalent to 1.96 million
Wow.
in 2019. And then later it was adopted worldwide. But where would we be without the lines, right? The lines, the brake pads, the windshield wipers, the turn signals, which Phil said, why the turn signals? Because nobody uses them anyway, but.
Or keeps them on all the time.
That is so cool, Vicky.
So that's all the ones we looked at. And I hope you enjoyed it. I had fun putting these together.
I love how you end with all the pictures to a little review.
Yeah. Because we're going one at a time. It's kind of, you kind of forget who you saw. So did anybody have a favorite? Or something that surprised them that they wouldn't have thought of?
I like the angel tree lady.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like knowing that about the women that created the things for automobiles.
Yeah, I thought that was very cool.
Yeah.
I love Hedy Lamour too. I mean, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Kristen, did you have a favorite?
I'm trying to think.
Sure.
I gotta go with Pam. I think the automobile industry is considered like the manly thing, and a lot of these women, like you said, did their own repairs and came up with like the safety behind some of this stuff. And the lady who drove cross country in her car, that was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Bletchley girls. I don't know if y'all have ever watched that, but it's a really cool thing about women during World War II, how they worked in England and they deciphered the codes, because spies and codes were so big back then, and they worked on their own cars, did all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't even think about women doing. But it's a really good series too. They've got like 2 or 3 seasons of it out.
That's cool. That's cool.
Cool. Thank you so much, Vicki.
You're welcome.
This was good. I hope it's not the last one.
Well, it's the end of Women's History Month. We'll have to do something different.